Hi, welcome back to the vlog of Inward Markings. Inwardmarkings.com is the website. This is chapter 33. Thank you to anyone who's watched any of the 32 that have been uploaded. As I've mentioned previously, this is during a period when things got particularly intensive, and that intensity has continued during the filming of this vlog. So as you can imagine, that makes things challenging, as not only did I not document events as they occurred, but I'm not presenting this vlog like in hindsight, about events in hindsight. Things are continuing to happen, so I've tried to be thematically consistent with the chapters so far, but if there's any overlap or lack of clarity that you want further explanation about, just comment or email inwardmarkings@gmail.com. But yeah, I'll try to do my best to be consistent and clear and make it flow as much as possible. So ghost experiences continued to occur during this time, so in addition to what I've discussed already, but also maybe for some of the occurrences, ghost experience might be inaccurate. They're just things that happen that I can't explain. So I'm gonna work through this list here so I don't forget anything. But yeah, excuse me for like having to refer to that. But yeah, it as I said, it was really intense. So I was returning to that restaurant to speak with that one person who I was drawn to speak to, because every time she came around in my proximity on the evening of September 14, the intense flooding of chemicals in my body just ramped up. And I now realize, kind of over the last few days, that was important, like in terms of the concept of catalyst that I've described previously. If there wasn't like a single person who I felt drawn to on that evening, then I think things would have been a little bit more vague, and I would have felt a little bit less, I guess I would have just been more uncertain, or not uncertain, but like I would most likely have returned to that restaurant, but I wouldn't have. There would have been less focus. What it helped me to do was to focus, especially in the context of having that previous experience at the supermarket. So I think having that one person meant that I was far more inclined to return to the restaurant, because there was something specific to try and seek out, and it and it connected with that supermarket experience. So I mean, life in general, when experiences or feelings like that come up, it's about another person. It's not about just like a general kind of place, or I'm sure it could be, but the nature of these emotions and feelings were very much aligned with a special experience with another individual. So yeah, but that kind of only dawned on me over the last couple of days. So I think I had like half a glass of beer on one of the times that I returned there, but apart from that, there was no alcohol. I was always as lucid as any other time during that period, and would not end up like staying there particularly late. So when I returned home, I wasn't like it was just, I wasn't like really worn down. So really, it was just, I'm just trying to stress that lucidity was still very much the case throughout that whole time that I returned to that restaurant on the Fridays. So one morning, and I can't remember, I think it was maybe 6 weeks, a couple of months after September 14, one morning I awoke on the Saturday after eating at the restaurant, and this was around the time when feathers were especially resonant, and they continue to be. And I awoke, and I can't remember if this was before or after a single feather had like appeared stuck to like the screen of the window in my room, and it's still there. And I remember at the time when it happened thinking, okay, that is a sign that I'm going the right way in terms of my life and what I was embarking on at that time. And when that feather goes away, I think that will be a sign that I either need to change what I'm doing, or a cycle has reached completion. Now that feather is still there, so I'm using that as a bit of guidance. But I can't remember whether this Saturday morning was before or after that happened, but I awoke, and for some reason I just felt I need to look down at my pillow straight away. I just remember it being a very sudden thing, like waking suddenly, arising, like lifting my torso up from the bed and sitting up, and then turning around. There's a finch right there. Turning around and needing to look at the pillow and see, this looks very like ordinary and whatever, but it's a feather-shaped piece of material, or leaf shape, but the shapes are the same. That was sudden. It was like dead center on my pillow underneath my head. So it wasn't to the side, and it wasn't like sort of falling off the pillow or like tucked under the pillow somewhere or somewhere down in the doona. It was literally dead center on the pillow. And if it was any other shape, it wouldn't have been so resonant, but because it is shaped like a feather, I was very taken by it. But the thing was, when I looked around, there's literally nothing in my room or in the apartment that this could have come from. And I, as I do every night, changed my clothes before I got into bed. Like, I could not work out a way that this had somehow not only ended up like in my, I don't know where it could have been positioned, like even if it was tucked in my clothing. I don't know how it ended up where it did, and why it was like remained dead center on my pillow under my head while I was sleeping. I thought, like, I even mentioned it to that person at that restaurant the following week, thinking, is there any way that someone could have like put that in my clothing? And she was completely like, there was nothing there in terms of like her knowing about it. And even if someone had done that, like at the restaurant or on the street on the way home, I changed my clothes before going to bed. And so as I think about it now, maybe there's something I missed, but it hasn't happened ever in my life, and it hasn't happened subsequent, and I just don't know how it happened. Like with the scratch marks on the inside of my thigh, waking up with those, like it was just very much another one of those occasions. And because it's shaped like a feather, it just was very resonant, and it just appeared on my pillow. I have no fucking idea how it got there. Anyway, it seems very ordinary, but if you can potentially see it from my perspective in terms of what was happening in my life, then yeah, maybe you'll share the significance. Okay, so slippers. So staying in my mother's apartment, she will go off on her cycling trips, and she had these really like bright slippers that I couldn't find, and I don't have them here with me today. And they're made of plastic and very distinctive. I haven't seen slippers like them. They kind of look like Star Trek, something from a Star Trek set, like the 20th century series. No, like Deep Space Nine or something like that, not the original. And so the way she does it is there's a seat near the door. She'll sit down on that, take off her slippers, and then change into her other shoes and then go off. And so the way the slippers are left, as you can imagine, is that they're just left as someone who sat down and then slipped their feet out of them, and so they're just side by side, parallel like that. And that's the way it always is. It doesn't vary from that. Oh, very occasionally she'll place the slippers on top of the stool, but no, it's always like that. And so I came out of my room and saw the slippers there, knew that she'd left, heard the door as well. And then like a little while later, I then left and got food or something, came back, and the slippers were no longer like parallel in a very ordinary kind of positioning like that. They were on the other side of the hallway like this, one tucked into the other, so not kind of like scattered in the way that if I'd like accidentally kicked them on my way out, or someone came in and quickly and just accidentally kicked them, but very deliberately, one tucked into the other like that, and flush against the opposing hallway wall. So if it was a human, it was very much a case of someone very consciously picking up the two slippers, tucking one into the other, and then placing them very like aligned with the wall. I presumed at the time, I was very struck by it because I'd never seen the slippers like that, and not since have I seen the slippers like that. And of course it was different to how they were when I left. So I presumed, even though the positioning was unusual, that my mother had returned because she'd forgotten something and had done that with the slippers, even though she'd never done that with the slippers in her entire life in terms of post me returning to Melbourne. And so I, like with other things, grilled her upon her return from her ride. She was adamant. She like was completely astonished when I asked her, actually, because she had not, I think, I don't know about times, but I can only recall maybe twice since Feb 2018 that she's had to quickly come back and get something, but it's always very immediate after. And I left maybe, I don't know, like at least 45 minutes after she'd left that time, and she had no idea of what I was talking about. She'd proceeded on her ride, and I then grilled her about other people having the key to that apartment. Now the keys to this apartment, like it's a involved deal. Like you can't get these keys cut at a locksmith. You have to pay money to get another key, and the body corporate keeps like tabs on how many keys each resident has. I think there's even a limit. But yeah, apart from myself and my mother, there were no other keys that anyone had at that time. No one had access to that apartment at that time, including the body corporate, including anyone official associated with that building. And even if they did have access, it was the most unusual positioning of the slippers. If you needed to grab something from inside the apartment as like a landlord or anything like that, you would have just walked past the slippers as they were. There was literally no purpose to going from that to that, which, I mean, yeah, and then positioning it against the opposing wall in the hallway. I have no explanation for that, and as has been the case with every other like mentioning of ghosts or inexplicable occurrences that I've had with my mother, she just doesn't even does not think about it beyond my conversation with her, which I find very unusual. Like, there's not even any curiosity there. She just thinks that I'm either lying or being crazy. So there's those. Now there's a red knife that is in the kitchen, not mine, it's my mother's, and it is used for very specific purposes. It's got its own little slot in like this knife holder thing that I'm sure you'll know what I mean. It's like a tall wooden one, and I've very rarely used it, but it was always either a matter of just like placing it in the sink, or washing it, putting it in the dish rack, or just returning it to that slot. There was never any reason, but I also never like removed that knife from that kitchen space, and I can't recall my mother ever doing that either. And it just disappeared. I have no fucking idea how it could have disappeared, especially because it's a knife, so sharp things, it's not something you're gonna necessarily just leave around. And the red handle makes it incredibly distinctive. And it's not like the house is like, it's not like the apartment is like this grand old like house with all these, nooks and crannies and like little hiding spots and, piles of objects that, things can disappear under easily. It's really quite sparse and kept very clean. And I cannot explain how this knife just suddenly disappeared. So my mother awoke one morning, and then I've returned back to the apartment from doing something in the morning, and she just has no idea where it is. And like, she refuses to believe that I haven't removed it from the house and lost it somewhere. Yeah, so anyway, there is literally no explanation for how that knife could have just disappeared. So in line with that, a trolley that I found between Feb 2018 and mid 2018. So before that, experience at the supermarket, but post, like, my mind everything just kind of being lifted from me after I landed in Melbourne, and my mind being in that meditative state. So it was still an extraordinary time, but pre mid 2018, I found a trolley. I just encountered this trolley in the street that'd just been left there, and it was in really good condition. It was a really solid one, and it was one of those ones that can fold up, and it just felt right to just take it with me. And it wasn't like, think of me what you will, but it wasn't like it had been, like, you could see, it was like really early in the morning, and it was like it had been left there in the same way that hard rubbish is left there. But regardless, okay, I'm a fucking criminal, whatever, but it just felt important to take that trolley. Amazingly, I had no idea of the brand at that time, but it ended up coming in handy for the launch of the brand, like transporting boxes, heavy boxes full of t-shirts, and some market stall stuff. But then I found an easier way to transport stuff, and so I stored it very carefully, just slid it in between some boxes and a chest of drawers in like this locked shed in the car park garage, and it was snug, very tightly slotted in there because I wanted to make sure it was out of the way so my mother could access like her writing stuff very easily. And it was just the perfect positioning to be able to just like slot the back of, even though it was foldable, the back's kind of still there, and to slot it in that like thin space was really good, and the handle was sticking out so you could just pull it out quite easily, and it was taking up very little space because it was positioned vertically. I then had reason to go down and retrieve it. I could not find it. Anyone who's watching this probably think, oh, look, he's just like misplaced it somewhere, or it's a locked shed. My mother has no reason to take out that trolley. I think it's too heavy for her to wield easily anyway. And no one else has the keys to the padlock for that shed space. And it's a large thing and it's heavy. And what's unusual is that if you're talking like universal terms, it's like the universe brought me in contact with it. It made sense later why I needed it. And then I don't need it anymore, so it's just disappeared. But yes, as I've really asserted clearly throughout this whole vlog, completely lucid. Like at that time, when I found the trolley, wasn't drinking alcohol. I barely drink alcohol. That's what I'm trying to assert. Like, I'm completely lucid, and I have no explanation for how that trolley has just suddenly disappeared from that very snug space in the shed. Okay, so also around that time, like prior to the launch, I would have these sudden bouts of anxiety regarding what I was doing. Like, even though there were signs that I was receiving and everything was going, I felt like the universe was telling me this is what you need to be doing. I still get these bouts of anxiety. And so around the time when animal symbolism was really potent, and it continues to be, I was just relaxing, listening to music on the floor of my bedroom in early 2019, and again had just like a sudden anxious moment, and suddenly felt something crawling like in my underpants, and but I felt it on my skin. And so, as you can imagine, I've quickly reached down and looked, and it's a cockroach. Not only had I never seen a cockroach in that apartment after arriving back from Bangkok, but I had no physical sensation of that cockroach like crawling up my leg or entering into my underwear. Now, think what you fucking will, but that's never happened to me in my entire life. And it has not happened since. But also the timing of when that cockroach appeared. Because the subsequent morning, there was a dead cockroach, like literally at the threshold of the front door when I opened it. And the thing is, not only had I never seen cockroaches in that apartment or even in that building prior to that evening and morning, but subsequent, I've never seen cockroaches anywhere again. So it appeared in my underwear during that moment of anxiety, and then again at the threshold of the front door the morning after, kind of like a reaffirmation, because of how potent animal symbolism had become at that time. I then quickly looked up, I had a smartphone by this point, I quickly looked up like the significance of cockroaches, and it was reassuring to me, even though the circumstances were so fucking weird. But yeah, for me it was a reassurance from the universe that it was okay what I was proceeding with. But yeah, I have no fucking explanation for those either. And yeah, like, you know, think what you will, but completely lucid and no fucking idea of how any of that could have occurred. Okay, so finally, thank you for sticking with this till this point. One of my t-shirt designs is a variation on a biblical quote. I don't know it from reading it from the Bible, but I know it just, yeah, from hearing it someplace. So I think it's like movie lines that get distorted over time, and then become kind of like the common understanding of what it is. But it still worked for me, so I just went with it. So the quote is the original quote is "Go forth and multiply," and it's about you know, obviously going out and breeding, which I'm not opposed to, but I don't sit well with this expectation that people must have kids, or that people who bear children are somehow superior and less selfish or not selfish compared to those who choose not to. And I'm not going to get into that involved discussion at the moment. If you want to have that discussion with me, fucking email me. I'm more than happy to go into detail. But also, what irks me about it is the basis of like the Catholic Church and organised religion underlying this like this kind of sanctimonious notion of like becoming the family person and bearing children and fucking, you know, look at me, fucking holier than thou type thing. So, but it worked in well with like the essence of the brand in terms of like being pro women, and like in terms of the skateboarding aspect of it, and trying to like promote girls and women in skateboarding. And so during that trance-like state where I was going down to Deep Rock every day, these are the ideas that were coming up, and not just regarding the idea of the brand, but like that quote and how it can fit in. And this stuff just kind of like, as I've mentioned before, just it was like it was downloaded. Like it was just bursting forth and resonating with like inspiration in my external reality. And so it just made sense to turn that quote into go forth and 7 ply. So a skateboard can have 7 or 8 plies, but the standard now is 7 plies of wood. And so I thought it fit in nicely with that, and I hadn't seen it done before. So I went with it, but had this sudden like moment of uncertainty where I was like, is that the actual, like, is it a biblical quote? Is that the actual wording? Blah, blah, blah. So I went to the library and looked up on the internet, because I think this is pre-smartphone. Looked up the quote on the internet, and I'm pretty sure it's the King James Bible. In the King James Bible, the quote, or the original quote that it's based on, is, I might get the chapter and verse thing wrong here, but who cares? So I think it's chapter 1, verse 28. So 1:28. And at the moment that I was reading that on the internet, I caught the time in the bottom of the screen. It was 1:28 at that exact moment. So given the context, like, you know, if that was a one-off, then, you know, I would have just laughed or whatever. But given the context of what I was going through, that really stood out to me. And so anyway, I got the information that I needed. I then needed to go to Officeworks to print some stuff out. I looked through my wallet or purse, and what is it? It's this thing here. Which is from Thailand, and I haven't been able to replace Well, I like it so much that even when the zip broke, I just thought, fuck it, I'm just going to put a rubber band around it, because this thing is, yeah, it's just important to me. And I'm very, like, in addition to being lucid, like, I don't, you know, I was collecting stuff that I'll talk about in another chapter, like found objects that were synchronistic, and putting them in here. I was occasionally putting feathers in here, but I keep it in order, and I'm clear about what's in it, especially regarding like important things like bank cards, etc. And no one else has access to it, no one else even looks in it, and I'm not like just like constantly putting random stuff in there and you know, etc. And so when a second Officeworks card was there when I looked through it to print stuff out after like checking up that biblical verse, it made no sense. It made no sense that there was a second Officeworks card in there, right? Which is, just for people who don't know, that like that's like the print card. So you charge it, and then you insert it in the slot, and then you can print, scan, fax, etc. And so I couldn't understand why there was a second one in there. Like the most that I've done, the most I've done, the only thing I've done apart from like returning the card to my purse after using it is sometimes if there's like a small amount left on there, I'll just leave it like on the counter for someone else to pick up. I think a couple of times I've thrown it away in the bin at the Officeworks, but there should only have been one Officeworks card in my purse. So because you can't distinguish between them, what I usually, even now, but especially back then when I was doing regular kind of printing and so forth, I'd have maybe like I'd load maybe like $1 or $2 onto the card, because I wouldn't need to print much, like more often than not like 50-60 cents. So when I put, like, I can't remember if it was the first or the second time, because there were two cards, but one of the cards had $8.21 on it, so the reverse of 128, which I just had an experience with at the library. And I have never, at that, like during that period, had never put anything more than like maybe $2, but even $1 was a big deal, because I just didn't feel the need to top it up, because I just, you know, topped it up as I went and wasn't doing a lot of printing during each sitting. And it had $8.21 on it exactly. So I have no idea how the card got in there. I have no idea why it was that amount, and I have no idea why it was the reverse of the 128 number that I'd previously, I just had an experience with prior. So I ended up naming that shirt 128. But then what became meaningful to me over time is that 128 adds up to 11, and the number 11 has been especially resonant. It's been a huge deal, the number 11, post September 14 of last year. So yeah, I'll end on that note, and I hope the meaning of those is apparent in my retelling of them. But yeah, just to conclude, I still have no explanation for any of these. If anyone has like an easy way to just like write them off, I'll be totally fine with it. I can continue living knowing that everything that I've relayed can be easily explained. Fuck it, you know. I don't identify myself by inexplicable experiences. These things have happened, and I'm sharing them as part of this vlog. So thank you, and I only wish you well. See ya.